Welcome back, guys. Hopefully everyone is doing well and everyone's enjoying the workouts that the different instructors are putting up onto the website and the YouTube channel for the past while. Basically jumping right in today, we're going for a lower body workout, working the musculature of the legs, the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, a little bit of core as well. Today we're just going to use a resistance band as our only real form of equipment and something to elevate our heels. Again, that second one's not necessary, but if you do have a book or a weight plate or even something just to elevate the heels maybe an inch or so off the ground, that's going to help us a great deal. Before we get started, you'll see from the video that there was no real warm-up included. Before this exercise that I'm showing currently in the video, I did some body weight squats. I did 10 to 15 reps and then a wall sit, just again to get some blood into the legs, get the movement pattern, nail down form, etc, etc. Again, you don't really have to warm up a great extent. A lot of these movements are low impact, but if you do want to go for a light walk or a jog before we get started, that's fine as well. You could also take the first set of this that I'm doing right now as a warm-up without the resistance band, just to get yourself familiar with the patterns, but again, that's of your own prerogative. The movements that we're starting with today, guys, again, are targeting the lower body, but this first section, which we're going to do 3 rounds of, are more quad emphasis. The quad is the quadricep, the front muscle of the leg. And to really target it, we're doing exercises that are driving the knees over the toes, so there's a bit more range of motion, there's a bit more knee flexion, in opposed to the exercises we're going to do in the second half, which are more hamstring and glute driven. At the minute, I'm currently using the band to resist some of the exercises, all but one exercise, I believe. The band gives more resistance at the top, which is actually where we want it for this, because we want to overload the quad in that shortened position. As you'll see with some of the exercises, the knee goes quite greatly over the toe. You don't have to go as excessive with this as I do. This is just the range of motion that I've accumulated over the years. You just work with what you can. The resistance band can be a bit uncomfortable over the top of your body, so if you have a towel or a jumper, maybe even a hoodie, the band will rest firmly on that on your shoulders and it'll be a bit easier. I've seen a lot of people doing body weight workouts for their legs and their bare feet. This may actually hurt you a little. The band itself, the elastic, may cause some friction. So maybe just wear some shoes, but again, that's your own prerogative. We're coming to the end of the first round here, and you may notice it takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes to do. That's okay. They're longer rounds because there's a lot of reps and you're doing each side unilaterally. So it's going to take longer because essentially you're doubling the exercises. Just entering into the rest period now of the first round. Again, the rest periods between all of these is more just going by feel and a strict rest and rep scheme. If you need maybe a minute or two, take a minute or two, but if you feel that you're ready to go back in earlier, that's okay. Drinking a bit of water, trying to stay hydrated throughout this as well. I think maybe there's about 30 seconds rest between most of these rounds for me, just trying to keep it as intense as possible and get a good caloric burn from that as well. The first exercise you can see we're doing here, we're going to go into cyclist squats. These are really quad dominant because the heel is elevated. You can see in comparison to a regular body weight squat that the knee is traveling much further past the toes. There's a greater degree of knee flexion. Essentially, one of the cues I'm trying to do here is show whatever's in front of me the logo on my top, which is a good cue to keep the chest up. I'm not so much focused on keeping the back straight because that's going to happen naturally just from able to drop down a bit further again with the heels elevated, changing the torso angle a little bit. I changed halfway through there just to give you a bit more example of what it'll look like from the front in comparison to the side, but you just stay on the plate or the book or whatever it is for the full 12 to 15 reps of that one. Again, this one is going to be 10 reps. This is a unilateral squat. We have the band placed over one shoulder and one foot, making the resistance profile greater on our left side currently. Once the 10 reps are done, we're going to go into the right side. The main challenge of these two is it just gives you a little bit more resistance on one side. It causes your core and your stabilizers to work more so you don't collapse into one side. It just is a bit more challenge and it allows us to work through a little bit more range of motion as well. As you'll see, the band is quite slack at the bottom. That's okay. We don't want particularly too much resistance at the bottom. We want it more at the top. more tension on our quads, as this is the focus of this first round. I'm showing a few different ways that you can place your hands in these exercises at the moment. At the start, I had them crossed over in a prisoner-like stance. It's an affectionate term. And towards the end, I had the hands out in front of me. You can do either way. Another way to do it is to clasp your hands into an almost prayer position, place them behind your head, but again, that's your own prerogative. For both those squats on each side, I did 10 reps. Now I'm going to do a static split squat, so less range of motion, but as you can see, I'm going very far forward. The knee is traveling past the toe, and that's keeping more emphasis and more knee flexion. I'm not locking out at the top. My leg's not going very straight, and it's the forward leg that's taking most of the tension. Because we don't have as much weight as we would usually have in the gym, our main focus is to try and just gain a lot of fatigue in the muscle, and also to create something called time under tension. And we're doing that by constantly staying out of a locked out position. So as you'll notice with my knee that's forward at the moment, it's never going to a straight angle. There's always maybe 45 degrees dropping into 90 or slightly more. And that's just putting a lot of stress over a great time, maybe 30, 40 seconds. And that's a lot of energy used up on the quadriceps there. Each one of those was 12, 15 reps. I went for 15 on those sets. If you have a lighter band, you can do more reps. If you have a heavier band, you don't have to reach the 12 to 15. Just try and go as close to failure in those sets as possible, especially when you get to the last exercise and you know you're heading towards your rest period. Again, I think this is 30 or 45 seconds. Could be less. If you do have a thicker band and it's a little bit more of a resistance profile, you probably will want to take more rest so you can give more of an effort in those sets. This is me beginning the third set with the cyclist squats. As you can see, I'm not really focused on keeping my back straight. It is still a cue that you should focus on, but it's not something that there's a lot of energy placed into, because as the knees travel past the toes, it allows me to keep more of an upright body position anyway. So this could be argued it's a slightly more safer position for the back to be in, especially if you have limited mobility in your ankles and your knees, because it allows you some sort of giveaway there. And despite being in a very small space, I still forget where I've put the resistance band, as you'll see quite a few times over the course of the video. For this final round, you've noticed that I've found a slightly more comfortable position for the band rather than placed on one shoulder. It's sort of draped over the side like a carrier bag and under the opposite foot. This does tend to pull you to the one side a little bit more. If you are looking to challenge your core and you're more experienced with this movement, this could be a suitable alternative in comparison to the first one that I used. Again, just turning to the side, no benefit really other than for you guys to see a little bit more. You will see I'm going quite far forward with my torso in comparison to the cyclist squats, but there is slightly more tension on the quads because I am making a conscious effort to try and drive the knees forward. Again, a constant cue for the squats there is to try and keep your legs pointed out. Don't let your knees buckle in. Keep constant tension throughout the legs, and that's how you're going to execute the best form throughout these movements. Heading into the split squats, again, keeping tension, trying to get as much time under tension as possible, transitioning through the exercises quite quickly. Currently working the left leg the most, as you can see, not really breaking 45 degrees. There's a lot of tension going through the quadricep, and it's a really good way to finish out the set. Switching to the opposite leg. Now again, if the resistance band that you have is too thick and you can't quite get it from foot to torso, especially for some of the taller individuals out there, what you could do is run it under your foot and hold it as if it was two dumbbells. That will also work. You'll just have to focus on keeping your torso more upright. Another alternative is if you don't have a resistance band, you could do this without it. Obviously, it's going to be less resistance. You could maybe shoot for more reps, or if you had some light dumbbells, if you're fortunate enough to at home, or even 2 milk cartons filled up with water, that'll be enough resistance. Just something to make the exercises slightly more difficult. Okay guys, that's the quadricep part of this one wrapped up. Going to take a small break, reset, drink of water. Now that elevation tool, I'm using weight plates because I am lucky enough to have some at home. But like I said, a book isn't going to be a bad alternative at all. In fact, it's probably going to be what most people are using. If you're doing it in your garden and you had some maybe bricks or tiles that you were safe enough to use, you could. But again, the book will be a great help. The first exercise we're starting with here is unilateral leg bridges. The main emphasis of this is a glute contraction. So we're putting our glutes into a shortened range here, starting off into a hip thrust, starting at the very top position where we've pressed our hips up. Take one leg off the floor, keep it straight, and you're just elevating it up and down, like so, like a leg raise. This just puts a little more tension, and you have to resist a little bit more with that opposite glute and hamstring. It's more of an isometric action for the leg that's staying very still, that's staying static. And what that does is sort of activate our quads and our hamstrings, especially after the quad work. So when we go into this, they are the muscle that's hopefully going to get the most stress and the most working from what we're about to do. The second exercise we're going into is a bit of a sumo deadlift. Now my stance isn't as wide as most people's. This is just because of the length of the band. As you can see there, I'm grabbing one half of the band and then both parts. One half's going to be easier. If you're grabbing the full band, it's going to be harder. You can adjust between there, make it a little bit easier and difficult through that variance. Very slight bend in the knees, not much at all, just keeping them soft. Obviously a bit more of a bend as you get down to the bottom, keeping the back straight, trying to keep the chin tucked. Again, focusing on trying to show the world the logo on the shirt. It's a nice little cue there. All I'm really doing is trying to lock up my glutes and my hamstrings towards the top of the movement. It's more of a stiff leg deadlift, reaching back towards my heels rather than just straight down, puts a little more emphasis on those muscles in question again as well. That is again 12 to 15 reps, but you can adjust that up you can adjust that up if you have a lighter resistance band or no resistance band, and you can make that harder if you have less reps. If you have less reps, you'll be using a thicker resistance band. Next, we're going into reverse lunges. Now, if you're doing this without the band, you can alternate, but I do recommend trying to do it one leg at a time. It puts a little more time under tension that we've talked about before on that leg. And if we are using a resistance band, it'll just make it a little easier to change once rather than every other rep. So essentially here, you're just lowering the back leg down to the ground gently, trying not to hit it too much off the floor. Trying to keep upright, not only for posture reasons and form, but because you'll get the most resistance out of your band as well. You'll notice that I'm touching the floor with the foot that's traveling back and forth at the top of the rep every time. That's just because my balance isn't great, especially today for this video. So that just allows me to sort of reset, if you will, at the top of each movement. You don't have to, and you don't have to go as far down. You don't have to bring the knee to the ground. It's just working with your own range of motion. So whatever is more comfortable, guys. Reaching for the plate here, bringing it back. Again, this is the book if that's what you're using to elevate. Essentially what we're going to go into is the same exercise as the first round. We're going to do some split squats, constant tension split squats, but the elevation of the heel allows us to get into a little bit more range of motion, hit a little bit more depth, and it makes it a lot easier to isolate the hamstrings and the glutes a bit more, as it doesn't allow the knee to go, as you can see there, hopefully with this video, the knee isn't traveling as far forward. It's not coming up as much either. The wider step just allows you to incorporate hopefully more emphasis for the quads. The glutes and the hamstrings in comparison to the quads in the last video. You will find these a little bit difficult, especially if you have a very large split stance and your heel is elevated. The balance will come into question here. As you can see in the video, most likely I'm tipping and swaying a little. If you have something like a doorway maybe to do these in, it'll give you a bit more support. You won't hopefully topple over a bit more. You guys with a lot more balance than me will find this very easily to do. Another option is to remove the elevation under the heel. It makes it a less balanced dominant movement, but if you want to give it a go anyway, I really think it's worth trying at least once to see. There's a few points here looking back that I am quite shaky, unfortunately. But again, just work through it. If you do feel like you are going to fall or you are tipping too much off balance, again, maybe try moving the plate or the book from under your heel, or try doing it somewhere that you can maybe lean on something like a wall, a doorway, or if you're outside, maybe even something else. That's one round done. 12, 15 reps for all the exercises. There's 4 exercises there. And the rest in between for these, just because I'm getting a little bit more fatigued, will be slightly longer. But again, that's okay. Judge it more by feel. I will say 30 seconds should maybe be the minimum that you should do. Give yourself some chance to recover, because it's going to allow you to give a better effort in each round. So this is the start of the second round. I finished the second round just because of time constraints and I needed to get on with some more stuff, but you can do this for 3 rounds. You could do the first one for 2 and this one for 3 if you wanted to isolate your hamstrings more and your glutes, but again, that's up to you. So the first exercise we're just finishing off on is the unilateral glute bridge raises. And again, that's just to try and activate our glutes, our butt muscles, our hamstrings, and even a little bit of the core. And then that just makes it a little nicer for going into the rest of the exercises like the deadlift. The deadlift this time, you're going to see it from a side profile, just so hopefully you have a bit better idea in terms of posture and form what you should be doing. Straight back. Not going anywhere near parallel, maybe just 45 degrees. For you guys that are slightly more flexible, you don't maybe have to bend as much of the torso as I do, but for me it's just slightly more comfortable. I think for maybe a lot of taller people that is going to be the case. Again, in the realms of range of motion and capability, some people aren't going to be able to go as close to the ground as much as possible. Go down to what's comfortable. Maybe a few inches below the knee is going to work for a lot of people, maybe further. But you're going to know probably the second or third rep in the exercise which one that you do want to sort of aim for each time. Next up, moving into the reverse lunges, starting with the right foot. Each time resetting just to keep the balance a little bit more. This is one of those exercises that doesn't really require the band. You could use your milk cartons that we've talked about before, or some light dumbbells if you're lucky enough to have them. You could also do body weight and do slightly more reps. But I do sort of hope that everyone will try and do the one leg for the allocated 12 to 15 reps and then move on to the next one, because you are going to feel more of a strain on that leg than if you're constantly going between the two. For the reverse lunges, if, for example, it's not an exercise that you're comfortable with, you get some discomfort for your knee or your hip, you could try front lunges, so stepping forward rather than back. Again, this would be done without the resistance band, just to try and make it a little easier to resist. Okay, finishing up on those lunges. Heading into the split squats. If you do find that the band can be a bit painful around the neck or the shoulder region, wherever you do have it, and you have it in a good place because you're wearing a thicker top or a hoodie, feel free to just leave the band on and take it off from the heel rather than the shoulder. It just means you don't have to constantly reset. Not a great tip, but maybe someone will get some use from it. Now for these ones, I started out going over the toe a little bit much. Throughout the reps, I decided to increase my stance. It did put more tension on the hamstrings and glutes, but as you can see, it did cause me to lose balance a good bit more than it usually would. But we are trying to keep that elongated stance. So instead of making the stance shorter, do try and keep your balance by maybe holding on to something or taking the reps slower. For our cool down for these exercises, because it was just a strictly lower body exercise, what we can do is really just focus on stretching out the quads and the hamstrings, either seated or standing. Because there was a lot of high volume in this one, I would recommend going for 20 to 30 second stretches to each limb at a time.